Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Football in Focus, joined as always by Kevin O'Connell. Kevin, how you doing?
I'm doing well, Ryan. How are you?
I'm good. I'm sort of amazed that they continue to let us do this show, but apparently viewership doubled last week when my mom logged on. So maybe she gave us a reprieve for a week before they boot us off the web airways. You had made mention of my coiffed of hair last week, and I wanted to follow that up by suggesting that I had a number of pieces of fan mail come to my house last week. How people got my address, I have no idea. But that was quite a kind of bone of contention for a lot of people. So I was actually on a walk this morning, and a nice lady wheeling a shopping cart was nice enough to cut my hair. So I'm ready to go this week.
I was more so thinking you maybe let your 3 or 4 month old son there, Griffin, have the shears there to take some hair off, because it looks like it was very professionally done.
No, I think the same result probably. Ruth, the woman with the shopping cart that cut my hair this morning, I'm not sure she has any formal training, but she really didn't have quite the canvas we were looking for, but the result speaks for itself. So nonetheless, the earliest game this week, one I attended, UCLA-Arizona State, sort of a statement game in the Pac-12 South. UCLA ended up winning it going away 62-27. I know Arizona State didn't have Taylor Kelly, and he's sort of the engine that makes that offense run. What did you see in that game? It seemed as though it was the UCLA team we were sort of promised at the beginning of the season, the team we didn't see against UVA, the team we didn't see against Memphis, and the team we didn't see against Texas finally showed up on Thursday night sort of under the bright lights.
Yeah, I think they were led. I thought their defense played really well, and they were very active. They forced some turnovers, and I thought Brett Hundley probably played his best game of the season. And a lot of people didn't know. Jim Moore did a great job keeping that close to the vest. We didn't know if we would see Jerry Neuheisel. We didn't know if we'd see a Brett Hundley. I actually heard from some people on the ground there in Tempe that Brett Hundley was going to play maybe 2 or 3 hours before the game, but that was the first I had heard, and these were people that are very much in the know. So it was impressive that they were able to keep that as secret as they were able to do, and not only that, but the way he played. I mean, that I don't want to say it vaulted him right back into Heisman discussion, because I think that he needs to play a little bit more consistent, but if you're a person, an evaluator at the next level, you pop that tape on, and it makes it pretty easy to maybe forget about some of his early season inconsistencies, because he was pretty impressive.
No, he certainly was, and that game was real tight coming down to the end of the first half. Ishmael Adams has a very timely interception for UCLA and takes it to the house. Gives them sort of a lead going into the first half that they probably didn't necessarily deserve just on how they played, and then they ran with it in the second half. So I think the game was a lot closer than the final score, because they did kind of play toe-to-toe in that first half, but it was certainly the team that I think we all kind of expected coming out of the gate. You mentioned that Jim Mora played things close to the vest and not allowing the information about who was going to be a starter come out. You've done a lot of coaching. You've been in a lot of locker rooms. Give us an idea. Does that really matter? I mean, I realize it's tough to prepare if you don't know who the personnel are going to be, but you've seen enough tape. You saw the whole Texas game where Jerry Neuheisel played. You know what Brett Hundley's capable of. Is that really a difficult hurdle to get over as a coaching staff and as players?
I never used to think it was, and then I did a CBS show, Inside College Football, and Fred Smoot was one of the analysts, and he was a All-American, consensus All-American defensive back, played in the NFL for a long time, and he said that it was very difficult, and the fact that we were talking about Kirk Cousins, and he brought up, Kirk Cousins, if you look at him when he's the starter and people know he's the starter coming into the game, he hasn't really won many football games. I think he's now 0-5 or 0-6 as the starter. I don't know if that number is correct, but as opposed to when he comes off the bench for an injured RG3, he's much better record-wise. And I just think that says a lot about what Fred was talking about and how teams really do defensively lock in and prepare for certain down and distance tendencies, certain down and distance thoughts by the offensive coordinator. Hey, I've got Brett Hundley versus Jerry Neuheisel. To me, I think the play calling has to change. And I think just as far as with the college rules, the 20-hour rule, and how much time they do get on the practice field as opposed to maybe in the NFL when you can prepare for a little bit of everything, they really have to pick and choose what they're going to get reps at. And I think in my history of playing, when I got a rep at something and I got to see a red zone defense or a third down defense, and then go out to Saturday or Sunday and you start to see that on the field, you play faster, you're more confident. The whole group of 11 out there just understands that they're all on the same page, and there's a level of confidence that goes with that. So maybe there is something to it. The more and more you watch it, you're starting to figure out that maybe these coaches have something figured out by the Belichicks and the Jim Moores of the world, who like to hide some of these injuries. But I guess we'll have to keep an eye on it. It's not something that I've always kind of watched closely, but in the past few weeks I really have. So having that conversation with Fred and talking to you about it as well, both on this show and off air, I think it's something to keep an eye on, because maybe these coaches have something figured out.
Yeah, and certainly there are so few things that are at sort of the disposal as far as tools that the coaches have. That injury information is one piece of that puzzle, and some play things closer to the vest than others. And I could see, especially Bill Belichick, playing things to his advantage. And if it's one thing he thinks he can get an advantage out of, he's gonna take advantage of that opportunity. USC played Oregon State. I know you've done a lot of work with Sean Mannion in the offseason as far as kind of following him and sort of his career and as a player. USC made him look fairly ordinary. I know you haven't gotten to see the entire game, but he had some struggles with his offensive line, even against San Diego State the week before. He is going to carry that team, and if Oregon State can't protect them, they don't have much of a chance in the Pac-12 North. And I think USC kind of wrote the script about how to beat Oregon State this week, just getting pressure in his face. He didn't necessarily handle it as well as he could have.
Yeah, I think other than really the 400 yards rushing Boston College was able to put up on them, that USC defense has been pretty impressive. They lost, obviously, the corner, All-American corner early on in the season, and he was suspended, and they've been able to kind of reload there at not only that position, but some other positions as well. And to me, I look at it, Ryan, and I just say that team, to me, when Buck Allen is running the way he can possibly run, and it comes down to the quarterback. And Cody Kessler was about as efficient as I've seen a Pac-12 quarterback this year, and just distributing the football, making the smart play, seems to be on the same page with Sarkisian. And I think that is the main storyline coming out of that game for me. I don't think it's real fair, and you're right, I haven't seen the whole game. I don't think it's real fair to say that a quarterback is ever ordinary or extraordinary in either sense. I think a lot of times when you really break down the tape, and every single week I go into these production meetings to do a game, I always want to build up this quarterback and make him a star and figure out a way to make this game, watchable for everybody by building it around the stars. And every coach tells me the same thing. Kevin, you know better. It comes down to the offensive line, comes down to the receiver being where he's supposed to be on 3rd and 15, and that timing that they work on all season long needs to be there. Comes down to the running back understanding, who his protection assignment is. And a lot of times when you go back and watch the tape, the way the coaches grade the film does not match up with the way we do as members of the media and sometimes even talent evaluators. And I think that's important to keep an eye on. But you're right. I think Sean didn't have his best game, and I'm looking forward to watching the rest of that game on tape from the All-22 version, so you can see a little bit of everything. But I think that Oregon State is one of those teams, like a Washington State or even like an Arizona, who I know has a big one this week against Oregon, that if they play at their very best and they have their explosive plays that we've come to know in the Pac-12, they become almost, it becomes a pick'em game, because they're going to go toe-to-toe with these explosive offenses, and that's why I say the USC defenses, the UCLA defense. I'm still waiting to see the Oregon defense be in a situation where they're playing up-tempo, and they're not at Washington State, but they might be against an Arizona or against an SC or against a UCLA. I can't wait for that football game just to see how they respond. And can you stand toe-to-toe in the middle of the ring with quality Division I 5-star talent on both sides of the ball? Who wins that one? I think it comes down to small decisions, not only by the coaching staff, but by the quarterbacks you're talking about. And Sean is not going to be able to be ordinary through the rest of the Pac-12 play and get that Beaver team to where they want to get to.
Yeah, well, Stanford had a big game against Washington, big Pac-12 North kind of showdown. Stanford's playing Notre Dame this weekend. It's one of the marquee matchups this week. We'll talk about that game in a second. You talk about sort of the offensive line from Oregon State maybe struggling in front of Sean Mannion. Stanford has 5 offensive linemen that will probably play in the NFL. They've got 2 NFL wide receivers in Ty Montgomery and Devin Kajus. And they've got 3 running backs that are as talented as anybody else in the country, yet they're struggling in the red zone. They're struggling with penalties. They're struggling in the red zone. They had problems against SC. They again had problems against Washington. Stanford's defense is absolutely keeping them alive this season. Kevin Hogan is somebody that people have talked about, maybe on the heels of Andrew Luck, but as a guy that could play in the NFL, and he has really struggled when the field shrinks. What have you seen out of him this year with the weapons that he has, the stout offensive line that he has, with his struggles? Is it just a matter of them not really having an identity of what they want to do on offense, or what is it?
Well, I think his entire career there has been built around exactly what you just talked about. None of it was built around him. And even when Andrew Luck was handing the ball off 30 times a game, and he had obviously Coby Fleener and some guys in the passing game, everything worked together. And I think what you've seen at times this year is when teams get them in third and not so manageable, maybe 7, 8 plus, and Kevin Hogan has to drop back and read a coverage and throw with timing and anticipation and maybe velocity sometimes to fit it into the tight windows that you have to throw in the Pac-12. I think there's been some issues there, and I think he's growing as a quarterback. I think it's very easy to look at the coaching staff there and the way they developed, obviously Andrew Luck when Jim Harbaugh was there, and obviously the way they've been able to develop talent at every position. I mean, there's a lot of NFL players playing on Sundays that perfected their craft at Stanford, and I think people really want him to be that next guy. He has the measurables. He looks the part. And I just think he's learning, and I think he's getting better. And as he continues to have the game be in his hands a little bit more instead of just being able to have 6 linemen in the game and 2 tight ends and just mash people. I mean, Ryan, I can put you in a Stanford uniform and have you hand off the ball 40 times and look like a Pac-12 all-conference quarterback winning games, because it not only does what you think it would do in keeping you ahead of the sticks, but it makes the play-action game and having Ty Montgomery and Kajus, like you said, these guys are open. But when you get in 3rd and 9, the power play is basically obsolete. And you go ahead and run it, we'll tackle you for 7, and you're going to end up punting it. So I think that's been the issue. You saw it some in the SC game, the way they were able to at least get some sort of stop against that run game. It's the million-dollar question for the rest of Pac-12 play, because when Stanford establishes the run and they run it and impose their will up front, they're almost unbeatable, and no matter who's playing quarterback. But I think it's important to remember that you have to make plays from the quarterback position, and then when push comes to shove, you saw it Thursday night in the ASU-UCLA game. Any college game you go see, Cody Kessler outplays Sean Mannion. Whosever fault that is, it really doesn't matter. 9 times out of 10, the quarterback that plays the best, his team's going to have a really, really good chance to win the football game.
Well, you talk about quarterback play, and one of the most talked about quarterbacks in college football is Jameis Winston. Florida State gets Jameis Winston back after a week of being suspended for some antics in the dining hall there in Tallahassee. They go to a North Carolina State team that, by all accounts, is not a great team. I don't think they're very well coached. They have not been very good in the ACC over the last 5 or 6 years. And Florida State somehow manages to win that game when all indications for the first 3 quarters were they were going to lose that game. He's obviously struggling with some maturity issues. Is this a team, as you've seen the last couple of weeks with him and without him, that can win another national championship?
I think you have to say they are, just because they've been there before, and every single guy on that roster understands what it's like to have to go win a national championship and be and particularly the way they won that game against Auburn last year. Adversity. How did they handle it? Jameis took him down the field and threw a touchdown to Kelvin Benjamin, and the rest is history. But I think in the fact that the book's kind of out on that team, and the fact that there is a little bit of turmoil off the field, you really don't know where Jameis's head is at. I think they're capable of having some slow starts, because to me right now, I look at that Florida State team, and it definitely seemed like it against Clemson, and it definitely seemed like it early on in that game against North Carolina State, that the only time that they really feel any sense of relief is when the ball gets kicked off. So there's almost that feeling of, exhale, and then they realize, well, wait a minute, we're playing a team here that has some talent. We played against some of these guys in high school. These guys can play. And particularly NC State, I would probably agree with you that there was some coaching things that could have been done differently in that game, but I saw some talent on that field, and I think it's important to remember Florida State, if they continue to want to have to win these games late and come back, it looks great on the Heisman resume until you lose one of those games, until you throw an interception trying to squeeze a ball in on third down, trying to lead your team back, and you're playing with fire, I think, a little bit, especially when you look at some of the teams that are still left on that schedule. It's not the hardest schedule in the world. I think the SEC teams, Alabama, Auburn, those teams have harder schedules. I think Oregon, UCLA having to play, they have harder schedules. But that, I think we talked about it. That Notre Dame game for Florida State, Jameson and that offense needs to be very careful, because I think Everett Golston and Brian, I'm losing the name here, head coach there at Notre Dame.
Brian Kelly.
Brian Kelly, yes. I think they're going to have that one circled, and they've shown that Everett didn't play great against Syracuse this past weekend, but they get the victory, and he's a true, if there is one in the country right now, dual threat, the ability to absolutely gas you on the ground, and he's throwing the ball, in my opinion, as well as anybody in the country.
You and I were both at the San Diego State UNLV game this weekend. You did the radio broadcast. I found it a bit curious, and maybe this is a statement about San Diego State's education as an institution. They had 2 color guys in the booth this weekend. Is that because both you and Kirk have ADD to the point where you guys both can't carry a game on your own, or what happened there? That was a little confusing for us fans.
Confusing for me as well, Ryan. I was told I was filling in for Kirk, so you could imagine my expression the first time I walked in the booth, and the only person in the booth was Kirk. So they not only didn't have a play-by-play guy, a producer, but they had 2 color guys. Kirk's been a friend of mine for a long time. He was one of my hosts on my recruiting trip. We go way back. I'm a huge fan of Kirk's. Just had to wade through the awkwardness there a little bit and figure out the best way to get out of this sticky situation. And the idea was we were going to go 3-man booth. And if you know anything about Ted Leitner, one of the best play-by-play guys around, in my opinion, he likes to give it full call, we should say. And Kirk as well is very much insightful and very smart about the game of football. So it was fun to kind of learn a new way of analyzing a game and picking my spots. But Ted was Hall of Famer like he is. He was phenomenal, and Kirk was very gracious to allow me to be in the booth, and it was fun. Now, the football game, San Diego State able to win it, obviously, but they take some casualties. And Quinn Kaler, with the third-degree AC sprain, I've been there, thought I just had an AC sprain and ended up having to have labrum surgery. So that's something to really keep your eye on, especially for a guy that had elbow surgery in the offseason. Doesn't have the strongest arm in the world to begin with. So you start messing with that wing there. That could really be something to keep an eye on if you're an Aztec fan. Also, Derek Largent, who I believe will play on Sundays one day. Emergency appendicitis, had to miss the game, and I've never dealt with it, never had a teammate deal with it, so I don't know. Ryan, you may be able to shed some light on that, how long he'll probably miss recovering from that. But San Diego State, maybe one of the most important games of their entire season, on a short week at Fresno State, starting a true freshman quarterback in Nick Bodden. So that'll be interesting to watch.
No, it'll certainly be an interesting one. Fresno State, in their own part, they're running a 3-quarterback rotation right now because they don't have one quarterback that's necessarily outshined the others. So I think that'll be an interesting quarterback watch on both sides of that film next Friday night, I think, in Fresno. Credit where credit's due. You called Missouri over South Carolina this past weekend on a national broadcast. If you can humor us for a second, we have probably the best college football slate of the entire year this weekend. Number 6, Texas A&M going to Mississippi State. Number 3, Alabama going to number 11, Ole Miss. We talked about 14, Stanford going to number 9, Notre Dame. Number 15, LSU going to number 5, Auburn. And then Nebraska at 19 going to Michigan State at number 10. Who do you like in those games quickly?
Yeah, let's start out, I guess, with the Alabama game. To me, looking at that, I picked Mississippi State to beat LSU 2 weeks ago, and I picked obviously Missouri to win that game. That game truth aside, I did not expect it to go like that. But that just goes to show you how hard it is to pick these games and know kind of how these things are going to play out with college kids and for that matter in the NFL. I mean, who would have thought the Vikings would beat the Falcons by 10 yesterday? I know you didn't, personally, talking to you. But I'm going to kind of go and say, as great of a weekend in college football as we have ahead of us, I think a lot of the favorites win. I think Alabama's going to beat Ole Miss. There was a couple guys that, for whatever reason, how it happens, I don't know, come out and provide bulletin board material talking about how it's not the same Alabama team. And I would just always, when you have that many five-star guys that sit around a locker room, I would always preface it with saying, be careful what you wish for, because you motivate a group of guys with ego and talent and the ability to come together that maybe haven't yet in full capacity, even though I think they did against Florida. I think you got to be really careful about what you're doing there. I think Alabama wins that one and wins that one going away, as much as I know Ole Miss fans probably hate hearing that. Obviously, moving forward, I think the next game, the Texas A&M game against Mississippi State, I picked them to beat LSU because of LSU's young quarterback play and the fact that they might have to go toe-to-toe with Dak Prescott. I think Kenny Hill and that Texas A&M team against an Arkansas team that was trying to ground and pound them and win that game at AT&T Stadium, I think they showed that they can kind of take a black eye or two and somehow find a way to win the game. It was a great football game. They won in overtime. But I think that propels them to Mississippi State. And I just think that Mississippi State's secondary is so poor that Kenny Hill and those receivers will make enough plays down the field and big plays to really make Dak Prescott just have to do a little bit too much. And I think Texas A&M wins that one. I think the next one you mentioned was probably LSU Auburn. Is that one of the ones you mentioned?
Yep.
I think Auburn, going through that scare against Kansas State on the road a couple weeks ago, I think that game will serve them well. Nick Marshall threw the ball very well in that game, and the ability of LSU's defense to stop the run. I just don't know. Brandon Harris, a quarterback that I've actually worked with, is going to get the start, true freshman quarterback. We'll see. I love Cam Cameron. I think Brandon Harris is incredibly talented. But once again, to go into Auburn and win that game, that might be asking for a lot. I think Notre Dame's going to beat Stanford, and I think they're going to beat Stanford because of Everett Golston and their ability to be so diverse on offense. I think that Notre Dame defense, we'll see. Can they hold up against that power rushing attack? Can Kevin Hogan make some plays against that Notre Dame secondary? Definitely looking forward to watch that one. And then I think the last game that you might have mentioned was
Michigan State, Nebraska.
Michigan State, Nebraska, which I think is going to be a big game for Michigan State, a big chance to get back maybe into the national conversation. If you go out and play an impressive game against Nebraska and hold Amir Abdullah, maybe under 100 yards, they've got the defense to do it. I think Michigan State wins that one. So all 5 of those games, but not very exciting picks out of me. I'm probably going to be wrong, like I have been many times in one of those games. But I just think that the point we're at in the season, the early season lull, is kind of gone. I think every team has kind of had their wake-up call. They've either lost that game or they found a way to win in overtime or late. And I just think that these coaches and Kevin Sumlins and the Brian Kellys of the world, I think they're going to have their teams ready. The Nick Sabans of the world, I think they're going to have their teams ready. And in a lot of those games, Ryan, I know this is a long-winded answer, but in a lot of those games you have kind of the Hugh Freeze type coach, the coach that the Dan Mullen type coach, who maybe are coming off some big wins, higher rankings than they ever have. How do you manage that? How do you manage the guys from reading their own press clippings and feeling really good about themselves, walking around campus with everybody telling them how good they really are?
No, I think that's fair, and I think it's just going to be kind of theater on the highest level that we're going to get to watch this week. I'm not sure. I'm not sure what happens in those slate of games, but I think we're in for a real treat this Saturday. The NFL, we had 3 teams that were really, really, really disappointing, for lack of a better concept, this week. Washington loses huge at home to a Giants team. Pittsburgh blows a lead against a backup quarterback at home in Tampa Bay. We sort of dogged Tampa Bay as a team last week, and they come and sort of overcome not having Jeff Tedford anymore calling plays. Backup quarterback and Mike Glennon winning in Pittsburgh. And then the egg that New Orleans laid at Dallas last night. Dallas, I mean, they were the worst defense, historically worst defense in 10 or 15 years last year. They didn't do a whole lot to change things. Sean Lee was going to be back, and then he hurt himself yet again. So that defense is very porous. Tony Romo didn't even have to do too much because New Orleans just couldn't move the ball on a relatively poor Dallas team. Those 3 teams were huge disappointments for me. Did you see anything in any of those 3 games that kind of spoke to you?
Yeah, I think I was blown away by what happened last night. on Sunday Night Football. I did not expect New Orleans to be shut down the way they were. And the thing that's starting to concern me about New Orleans is whether it was against the Cleveland Browns or the Dallas Cowboys or whoever's been on their schedule, even Atlanta. In big moments, that offensive line is having a real tough time keeping people off of Drew Brees. And it's not always just sacks, and you can look at the stats and say, oh, they sacked him 4 times or 5 times, and that's a problem. It's the plays where they're throwing him off the spot, making Drew Brees move. He's so good at it, but he is only 6 foot tall, and I think they're moving him a lot off the spot, and they're trying to still have that vertical passing game. I think he misses a guy like Darren Sproles on 3rd down to get the ball out of his hands too. Everybody in the league knows Jimmy Graham's going to be a factor. Brandon Cooks and Marcus Cole. You just think about the weapons that they have, and it can't be that. It cannot be Brees and these guys not on the same page, because it really isn't. The only time they're erratic on offense is when teams have been able to make Drew Brees uncomfortable. And I think that the book is out, the MO, the blueprint is out, and Dallas surprised me. I mean, they were able to get some push. They were great in the run game, which they've been all season long, and I think offensively, the way Dallas just kept throwing haymakers, and they're not haymakers always Tony Romo to Dez Bryant. I love what Scott Linehan and Bill Callahan are doing there with DeMarco Murray and running the football. Jolan Dunbar, these guys are flat out dominating the line of scrimmage and allowing that offensive line not just to be sitting ducks all day and allow them to be blitzed and pressured. They're getting pushed and they're wearing down the opponents, and they're making things a little bit easier for Tony Romo, not asking him to do everything, every single snap, to throw for 500 yards and 6 touchdowns. And that's helping to eliminate the turnover problem we saw in week 1. And when the Cowboys don't turn it over, their talent level is so high that I think they can play with anybody. And that's what's been impressive about that, obviously. And then Tampa Bay, I think you just got to give Mike Glennon a lot of credit. On the road against Dick LeBeau's defense, finds a way to get the job done. There's no other way to say it. It was a huge disappointment for Pittsburgh, but you know what? I think Lovie Smith he's so cool, calm, and collected that I think as bad as it's been for Tampa, they found a way to just continue to work, continue to grind. And a coach that's a friend of mine that I've gotten a chance to know, Marcus Arroyo, has been put into a really tough spot there, having to call plays for somebody else's offense that he just learned this year. So I think that's it's definitely something that he deserves a lot of credit, with a young quarterback kind of thrust into that role and to drive the team down there and somehow find a way to win that game was extremely impressive. And I don't want to let this show go by without talking about Phillip Rivers. I did the Chargers post-game show last night. He's the MVP in the league, in my opinion, in the AFC, no question. And I think if it wasn't for DeMarco Murray in the NFC right now, I think those 2 guys are kind of the guys that I think everybody should be talking about. I think the Broncos are about what we thought they would be. Peyton Manning, and maybe if he wins in Seattle, we're talking about him coming off of a bye. But to me right now, what Phillip Rivers is doing with that Charger team, with the injuries they've had on the interior of that offensive line, and what DeMarco Murray's consistently doing to make that Cowboy team play to their potential, I think these 2 guys right now, if they handed out the awards, which they don't right now, I think they would win both of them.
I think it just speaks to the parity in the NFL. I don't think the Chargers or the Cowboys were teams that anybody were talking about at the beginning of the season. I mean, it was your Seattle Seahawks, your San Francisco 49ers, your Denver Broncos that everybody was talking about. We talked last week, Cincinnati Bengals undefeated to start. We talked about a lot of these teams, the Arizona Cardinals, Philadelphia Eagles, who basically coached their way out of a win in San Francisco yesterday afternoon. I was at that game with a couple of clients. Just inexcusable, some of the coaching decisions that Chip Kelly made that cost them that game. But I think the parity in the NFL is really kind of propped up right now with some of the teams that we didn't necessarily give much credit to early in the season leading their divisions or being sort of the stories of the NFL. And that's, I think, one of the things that makes this league great. I think we saw a quick glimpse into what Teddy Bridgewater can mean for a Minnesota Vikings franchise, that with the Adrian Peterson nonsense can be sort of the savior there. I know Matt Castle's a close friend of yours, kind of loses his stranglehold of the job early because of injury. Now Teddy Bridgewater's injured with the ankle. Don't know when we're going to see him back, but I think there's a lot to look forward to for that Vikings franchise from that position. Tonight's game. New England has a tough task going into Kansas City, notoriously a very difficult place to play. I've heard a lot of media outlets, pundits, starting to downplay Tom Brady's abilities anymore. They obviously didn't address the offensive line issues that they had, traded away their best offensive lineman, which kind of baffles everyone. He doesn't have the playmakers on the edge that he has had in the past. You played with him for a couple of years. Has he lost a step or two, or is it just a matter of an offensive line not playing great and them having some early season struggles?
I completely think it's the latter. I was blown away by them trading Logan Mankins. I think we talked about it here on Football in Focus. I just think that they lost some of their identity, and nobody's talking about it. Nobody wants to mention that Dante Scarnecchia is no longer that offensive line coach, and for 30 years practically, ever since Bill Belichick's been there, he's been in charge of figuring out how to keep number 12 upright, and they don't have him there anymore. And I can personally tell you that there was many, many times where it was chaos on the sidelines. How do we do this? How do we fix this? How do we block that? And the one guy that figured it out was not Charlie Weiss, was not Josh McDaniels, was not Bill O'Brien. Dante Scarnecchia figuring out a way to get his 5 guys up front cohesively picking up whatever you wanted to send at them. And they played the Jets. They play the Jets twice a year, and Rex Ryan sends everything at them, the kitchen sink included. And I think that they've always notoriously figured out a way in crunch time, for the most part, to block it up and let Brady do his thing. I think Tom Brady's going to be just fine. I think you're going to see them spread out the Kansas City Chiefs tonight without Eric Berry playing safety. Gronkowski's matchups should be favorable. I think Julian Edelman will have a big night. I still like the way they have to be able to run the ball, and I like their running backs, but unless they can, very, very similar to a lot of teams in the NFL right now, unless you can win at the point of attack, you literally are asking for 3rd and 7+ all day, and against the NFL and the defenses and the speed that are over there, it requires precision. It requires the best execution you could possibly have, snap in and snap out. Otherwise, drives end, rhythm is lost, and games are lost. So I think to put all that on Tom Brady, it's low-hanging fruit, and it's people that really don't know what they're looking at. And you can just look at Drew Brees last night as an example. When they're uncomfortable in the pocket and they can't use that patented footwork, sliding and moving in the pocket and having a clean pocket still to throw the football, the job gets a lot more difficult than it needs to be. And I think the Patriots will spread things out tonight. I think you'll see them go empty quite a bit, try to get some matchups inside for Edelman and Gronkowski. And I think they'll probably use some tempo to keep the crowd out of it. I expect the Patriots to win this football game tonight.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a real test for Brady. They're starting a rookie right guard, and they're starting a rookie center as they sort of shake up that offensive line. It'll be interesting to see sort of how he handles potentially some pressure up the middle, which, as you know, no quarterback likes. Wanted to give a quick shout-out to the 360 Client of the Week, Griff Whalen. 38-yard punt return, a couple of 30-plus yard kickoff returns, recovered an onside kick in the first quarter, up 7-0. Obviously, Indianapolis wasn't messing around at home. They wanted to put Tennessee away quickly. Pat McAfee hit a perfect onside kick. Basically, Griff just ran along the sidelines, picked it up, and it was one of the easier, smoothest onside kicks you'll see. So congrats, Griff. That was awesome to see. Kevin, thanks again for your time. Appreciate everybody joining us on Football in Focus, presented by KO Football and 360 Sports. Thanks, bud. See you next week.
Look forward to it, Ryan.
All right, bud.
Is that did that show